Okay, great. Here with us is Farron Cousins, co-host of Ring of Fire on YouTube.com daily and contributor to the Smog blog, executive editor of Trial Lawyer Magazine, TRO Fire, and YouTube.com/The Ring of Fire. Farron, welcome back to the program. It's been a while.
Thanks for having me. It's great seeing you again.
Great having you with us. So there's a lot of stuff that you've been reporting on and ranting about, and I wanted to catch up with you on this. Shell Oil, let's start with that.
Yeah, that's a big one that came out within the last week and a half. All of these documents have been uncovered from Shell, much like happened with Exxon a few years ago.
These documents, what do you...
Well, internal documents from the company that show that back in the early 1980s, they understood that their emissions, their company, their practices, everything they were doing was contributing to what they didn't realize at the time was climate change, but they understood it was destroying the environment, putting these pollutants in the air, and causing the greenhouse effect, what we called it back then. So they knew it back in the 1980s. They understood it. They had their own scientists warning them that, hey, we're destroying this planet. We're going to cause this long-term warming trend because of what we do. So Shell executives, how do we go forward with this? So Shell had two options at that point, and these are pointed out on the documents. We can come to the public, we can say, all right, we found out we're screwing things up, we need to do something about this, or, and this is the option Shell went with, obviously, we're going to cover it up, we're going to bury it, we're going to muddy the waters, we're going to create, these little grassroots organizations that, make things a little less clear, spread doubt, misinformation, and that's where we are today. After 40 years of this.
This is not a new strategy. In the early 1930s, they concluded definitively that asbestos caused mesothelioma, which is what killed my father. I mean, this is very real personal for me. And they buried it. They covered it up. They did exactly what you're describing. The asbestos industry did. They finally went down in about a decade ago, a little more than that, a couple decades ago, I guess. And then the tobacco industry. The tobacco industry knew by the 1950s. Definitively. I mean, it had been speculated for a century, but they knew definitively by the 1950s that their product was killing literally 500,000 or 1 million, actually back then, more than 1 million Americans every year. And yet they were continuing to give, the way my dad got hooked is he went off to World War II, and every week he got 2 cartons of Lucky Strikes for free from the tobacco companies. Every soldier in his, in his army, whatever it was, battalion or platoon or whatever they call it, got it, and they were over there stationed in Japan, and they got their cigarettes, and he was addicted for the rest of his life. And so, and then, Shell and, ExxonMobil did the same thing. Yeah. So, I don't know about Koch Industries. They're not so much a developer or a producer, but are they all literally playing from the same playbook? I know some of the same scientists have been involved in both tobacco and climate denial.
They really are. I mean, everybody is operating off this same, we knew it before the scientists in this country came public, so we got the jump on it, we're going to cover it up. We share scientists. The big story, a decade or so ago revealed of Exxon offering, I think it was $10,000 to any scientist willing to come out and write a paper saying that climate change is a hoax, it's not real, the science doesn't support it. Oh yeah, it was a wow. Big, well, it should have been a big story. It wasn't that big. And this is something Pap talked about all the time, because these are the kinds of scientists that he goes up against that represent these corporations that have to come out and say, no, our pollutants didn't cause your cancer, it was, air quality. You lived a poor lifestyle. That's why you're suffering this disease.
You didn't get enough vitamin D.
Yeah, not what Monsanto or DuPont had done to you.
Right.
And they do. They hire, as Pap calls them, biostitutes, and they're willing to go out there and create any kind of phony science that won't stand up, under any kind of scrutiny. It's not peer reviewed, but people see it comes from a scientist, and they say, okay, well, scientist A says this, and scientist B says that. I guess it's somewhere in between. But that's not how it is with climate science, and we know that now. Right. There's no such thing as science denial anymore. It's denying reality.
Yeah.
And so
it's flat Earth society.
It is.
So I mentioned the asbestos industry and the tobacco industry very specifically for the purpose of showing that we have, through the mechanism of the group that you're associated with, trial lawyers, We have taken down entire industries by suing them and saying, you can't do that to us anymore. I mean, asbestos and tobacco are still doing it to us, but the harm has been somewhat mitigated.
Right.
And here we're not talking about, you know, killing 500,000 Americans a year, which tobacco continues to do. We're talking about the possibility of rendering the planet sterile for mammalian life, basically, for the life of anything larger than a dog. You know, if we were to see something like the Permian mass extinction or even the PETM, you know, these extinction events caused by global warming. So do you think that there's a very real possibility, and are you seeing any efforts out there by people like the trial lawyers at this conference to stand up and say, okay, we're going to take you suckers down?
It is remarkable because there are so many different lawsuits from different groups, different organizations, different plaintiffs right now against all of these companies. We have our Children's Trust. Every time they've gone in front of a judge, the judge has allowed the case to go forward.
Is this the group that is associated with the climate scientist from NASA, whose name is?
Hansen.
Yeah, James Hansen.
Yes.
On behalf of his granddaughter?
Right. And so, you know, this one, that was one of the first major ones, and they're going after, you know, state, local governments, federal governments for their inaction. They're going after them for the pipelines. And the judges who have looked at it in these preliminary hearings have said, you have standing. You make a valid argument, your evidence looks credible, you get to proceed, much to the chagrin of, you know, the oil companies and the regulators who have allowed this to happen. In California, you've got at least 10 different cities suing oil companies for the costs of sea level rise, because they're having to, you know, work on all these mitigation plans, spend all this money because their towns are going to be underwater in a few decades.
Well, and some of them, I mean, Miami Beach right now, they're having to put pumps in.
Exactly, and I forget the name of the small island in Louisiana, but they're currently working on having to move an entire population off of an island in Louisiana because they've only got a few years left. And that's what people have to understand. This isn't the far-off threat, you know, that we thought it was when Al Gore was running for president. It wasn't, you know, 50, 100 years away. These are things that are happening now, and just like with our Children's Trust, these other lawsuits, the judges are moving forward. They're going to go to trial. Recently, a judge said that he wants to bring climate science, the scientists from the corporations, the other independent scientists, he wants to bring them in, have them all present their evidence. So basically, he's putting the science itself on trial. And if he does the right thing, if he does side with the real scientists over the biostitutes, that's going to change the game. That's going to change the conversation. That's going to be the legally recognized truth in the court system.
Which court is this being adjudicated?
Gosh, I forget.
It's a federal court?
Yes.
Yeah. And so that's interesting. What happens when that gets to the Supreme Court, where you've got 5-4, maybe even, you know, 6-3 ratio of wackadoodles, you know, who some of them, you know, Neil Gorsuch's mom, Ann Gorsuch, was Reagan's EPA administrator, and she was worse than Scott Pruitt in many ways, and she had to resign in disgrace. I mean, that's his mom. You know, what's he going to do on the Supreme Court?
Well, you know, even during the Bush years, we had the conservative Supreme Court when the, I believe it was Clean Air Act came up in front of them. They actually ruled and said, no, EPA, you have to enforce this Clean Air Act. That is your job.
With regard to carbon dioxide.
Right. And so I don't want to say I have hope with anyone on that court, but, you know, we've seen them shock us in the past. It could happen here. You know, it could be 5 years before this case makes it to the Supreme Court. Right. So we're not sure exactly what the makeup at that point will be.
Yeah. That's interesting.
But so far we're making so much progress.
We're talking with Farron Cousins, co-host of Ring of Fire on YouTube.com, daily contributor to the DeSmog blog, and executive editor of Trial Lawyer magazine. Farron, we have about a minute and a half here left. Thoughts on Scott Pruitt?
I'm glad that people are talking about the EPA finally. It's just very disappointing they're not talking about all the regulations that he is trying to walk back. Yeah. That's the story. You know, there was a great story on Think Progress a couple days ago talking about the fact that if Scott Pruitt is successful in his agenda of repeal, 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 we're talking 100,000 deaths per year that are going to happen if we take away all the rules that he wants to take away, if we want to take back the Clean Power Plan. 100,000 a year. And this is
dead Americans.
Yes.
But the impact will be worldwide. I mean, it could be millions of people dead, but just in America, 100,000.
Absolutely.
Because of Scott Pruitt.
Because he wants to pay back the oil companies. He's willing to sell the lives of 100,000 people in America every year just to pay them back a little bit. So yeah, he paid $50 a night for his condo. Fantastic. He's going to get people killed if he fulfills his agenda, and that's the bigger story there.
Yeah, and the corporate media in this country does not want to touch that story, tragically, because they're still pandering to the idea that, well, there's a debate about these things.
Right.
I mean, it's beyond bizarre. It's criminal. Farron Cousins, co-host of Ring of Fire on YouTube.com daily, contributor to the DeSmog blog, executive editor of Trial Lawyer magazine. You can, the website, TRO Fire, as in the ring of, trofire.com, and of course on YouTube /The Ring of Fire. And you can tweet him at Farron, F-A-R-R-O-N, balanced. Farron balanced. Cool. Farron, thank you.
Thank you very much, Tom.
Great.